where we put these victims just before we really gonna put them away. And this was actually thought of by a guy named Yuppie, which, if you're Dutch, it sounds pretty funny. And he said that if you have a 4-entry victim cache, it actually removed 20 to 95% of the conflicts for a 4 kilobyte directly mapped data cache. That's actually quite good with just 4 elements. And this technique was used in the alpha, in some HP machines, and also in the AMD Apple, which has 8. So how does it work? First, we normally would say is something in the cache. If it's so, then we just put the data to the CPU. If it's not in the cache, then we're going to see, okay, but maybe it's in the victim cache. Maybe I just tried to evict. And if we hit, then we return actually this particular value to the primary cache, and we put the value in the primary cache to the victim. So now we actually put the victim back in the cache. So we said, oh, sorry, you should not have been a victim. But now another block is going to be a victim, which is actually going to it's going to be put into the victim cache. And if it's not, then we read data from the next level of the memory and move the data to the normal cache, and we put the thing that we replaced in the primary cache, we put that one in our victim cache. So this is how this victim cache works. And it's a relatively cheap approach. Now, a summary of the miss penalty reducing techniques: we can have multi-level caches, we can have the critical word first versus early restart, we can give priority to read misses over writes, we can merge the write buffer, and we have victim caches. Now let's quickly go back to this merging the write buffer, which I did not completely understand myself now. Maybe you guys can think with me. So we have write-through cache rely on write buffers. That's true. That's typical for write-through caches. And then on a particular write, the data and the full address are written into the buffer, and the write is finished from the CPU's perspective. That's true. We just put it into the write buffer. Now the problem is that write back full stops. I think now they're talking about the write back cache. Do you agree with the WP? Huh? Write buffer. Oh yeah, exactly. Now I get it. Sorry. Yes, if the write buffer is full, then we will still have it installed. So now what it tries to do is to merge the write buffer. Multi-word writes faster than single-word writes. And write buffer.
If you write the data and the cache to your RAM, multi-word aligned bytes write much faster back to the RAM than when you write single words consecutively. So if you write in whole blocks consecutive memory in one go, you will still the write back will be much faster.
Yes. So now yes, exactly. You try to merge several words that you want to write together, because then you can use the same part of the write buffer. Right? That's true. I was completely caught off guard with this slide, because I was thinking of something similar to this, that you would merge the write buffer in addressing the memory. That's why I was off. But you're right. You're actually merging the different words. Good. So look at this one, and so we can also try to reduce the cache miss penalty and the miss rate via parallelism. We can try to overlap execution of instructions with activity in the memory hierarchy. So if we're at some point trying to fetch new parts from memory into time, we can try to do some other operations with the CPU. So there are some ideas that we can have. We can have non-blocking caches. That's reducing the stalls on the cache misses in the CPU, and basically we have to have out-of-order completion for that. And we can do hardware prefetching of instructions and data to reduce the miss penalty. And we can also do prefetching with the compiler. So first, non-blocking caches. What are non-blocking caches? If at some point we look in the cache and we have a cache miss, what we will have to do is we will have to get the data from memory into the cache. Now, in the meantime, the CPU normally would be stalled because the cache is now busy. What we can do is say other parts of the cache may still be valid, so I can still operate some other instructions which might want to address the cache. But in order to do that, there are some things that we need to do. We will require some extra bits in the registers in out-of-order execution, and well, we need either out-of-order execution or we need some extra bits in the registers, and we need multi-bank memories, especially in the cache, because now normally if you have a single port cache, then we are writing now to the cache something from memory, we are not able to access the cache from another instruction. So if we now have a multi-port or multi-bank memory as the cache, then we can still access other parts of the cache while a certain block is being rewritten. So we have hit on or miss, which would be that we allow a hit to still be there when we're processing a miss. But you can also have a hit under multiple misses, or actually a miss under miss. So the question is, when I'm allowing instructions to still access the cache while I'm processing a miss, do I also allow another miss to be processed and then still the processor to be accessing the cache? So that's why we can also call a hit under multiple misses, we can also call it miss under miss. And this may even further lower the effective miss penalty by overlapping multiple misses. But of course your cache is going to be a lot more complex, and we need multiple memory banks, and well, at least it has been implemented. For example, the Pentium Pro allows 4 outstanding memory misses. And here we see the MIPS pipeline. You see now that with the data, with the memory subsystem, it's actually split into 3 parts: the data fetch, the second data fetch phase, and TC was, but it's also part of the memory subsystem. And this is basically also pipelining the cache, because we're accessing the cache. There's multiple things happening here, and the whole process of fetching something from memory is pipeline. Of course, this will also allow us to overlap the delay that might be involved in accessing memory. Now, we talked about hit under miss and hit under multiple misses. And if we now look at programs and we see how much times this might actually be beneficial, we see that if we look at hit under 1 miss, this will actually be beneficial in a lot of times. For example, I see here 40% to 100% in one extreme case. If you have hit under 2 misses, it's already not as beneficial anymore, and a hit under 64 misses, miss, you are already almost as good as a hit number 60 form. So it's we don't have to spend too much hardware costs to have the more complex versions. Now, another technique is we can prefetch. We can do hardware prefetching of instructions and data. So what we try to do is put things in the cache ahead of time. And for example, what does the alpha 21064 do? It actually for the instructions, it actually gets 2 blocks when there is a miss and puts one of those blocks in a stream buffer. And then if there is a miss in the instruction cache, it will actually first look into the stream buffer. Now there is only one stream buffer, and it has only very few elements, so it's going to be overwritten a lot. But papers have been written on the fact that it is very beneficial. Then you can also do data prefetching. Again, our guy Yuppie has done some research there, and he said that if we have one data stream buffer, which works similarly to the stream buffer in the instructions, actually we can use it in 25% of all the misses in the 4 kilobyte cache. And if we have 4 streams, we actually put that up to 43%. So again, just like with the victim caches, with a very small additional amount of memory, we can have a very good improvement. Later research also saw that for scientific programs, if we have 8 streams, it actually goes up to 50% to 70% of the misses. When we use 264K4 reset associated caches. It means that it's a good thing. Of course, what we do need in order to do these prefetches without extra penalty is we need a wider data bus. There has to be more memory bandwidth, so we can fetch more of the data in one go. If we put the prefetched data in the cache and we do not put it in a stream buffer, then we can have cache pollution. And cache pollution basically means that we fetched something which we're not going to use because it was basically speculatively fetched, and it's taking room in our cache. So that's a waste of cache, which we call cache pollution. Now we can also do software prefetching. If we extend the instruction set architecture with special instructions which allow us to prefetch data that we want, the compiler can try to be intelligent about it and insert them way before we need it, and so save the time. So because we know that the data is already there. Now we have basically 2 flavors of the data prefetching. We can prefetch something to a register, and we can prefetch something to the cache. And so there are some examples of ISAs that do either approach. And a general feature of these prefetches is that they cannot cause page faults. Have you already talked about page faults with my colleague? I don't think so. So page faults have to do with the virtual memory system, where the memory is split into several pages, and if a page is not in the memory but it's on disk, we have a certain thing called page fault, and this has to be dealt, but it takes a lot of time. So these prefetches, they do not do anything with the page faults. They are not caused. So it's basically a speculative form of execution. Well, the problem with prefetch instructions is that they take time and they may pollute the cache, as we saw before. And the question for the compiler that it has to answer is the cost of the prefetch less than the savings that are induced by the reduced number of missions? So far first technique would be we can use smaller and simpler caches. If we use a small direct mapped cache which does not use any extra operators, or we do a square mapped cache, this would help the hit time because it's a lot faster. And we can also try to say we at least have to have a cache which is small enough so it fits on chip. Of course, as everything that's on the chip is going to be a lot faster than if I have to go off chip. And we also try to keep the cache simple enough to have a cycle time of maybe 1 cycle. And of course the direct map cache will be able to do that, and then the tag check is going to be very fast. While if we have a set associative caches, especially the more complex ones, we will have to compare the tags of several of the blocks in one cache set, and that can take a little more time. A second thing that we can do is we can try to avoid address translation. Now, address translation, again, is a little bit related to page faults that we just talked about. It has to do with the virtual memory. And the virtual memory that is seen by a particular process is mapped onto physical addresses in your memory, and they are translated. Now, if you first do the translation and in the cache actually you have only physical addresses, then the translation look-aside buffer, which you need in order to translate virtual addresses to physical addresses, has to be run sequentially with the cache. If you have, if you swap it around and you have actually caches that take virtual addresses instead of physical addresses, then you can actually do these things in parallel. So you can do the translation look-aside buffer and the cache. So we call these caches virtually addressed cache or virtual cache, as opposed to the normal cache that we've been talking about so far, which would be physical caches, which use physical addresses. But the problem with virtual caches is that the addresses are only valid for a particular process. Now, if I do a context switch, I will have to flush the whole cache because the whole cache is now invalid. And it will increase also by all the compulsoriness that we have, because all the values have to be fetched anew from the memory. And another thing is that we have to deal with aliases because we have virtual address map. It could be that certain virtual addresses are actually mapped to the same physical address, which means that that one data element could be in the cache multiple times, but we don't know it because we're just using virtual addresses. A solution to flushing the cache is that we add process identifiers to the tag, so we know for which process a certain virtual address is valid. So you could not have a hit for a particular process if the particular cache line is not for a particular process. Of course, you can imagine this will take extra logic and it will make your cache a little bit slower. So this is actually the first slide I really did not look at so far. So I think it's one of the last few slides, so that's something. In a classic pipeline, in one cycle, we must read an instruction and load or store data. As you can see, there is we have an instruction fetch which addresses the memory, and we have the memory subsystem which might address the memory. And this is a potential structural hazard because we have one memory subsystem. What we can do, we can try to serialize accesses. So basically, now we're introducing stalls, which is going to waste some cycles. It's going to be slow. Another thing is that we can have a multi-port cache. It's going to make your cache a little bit slower. It's going to consume more power because you're having more of your transistors switch. more sensitive to hardware faults. But another thing is that we can split the instruction cache and the data cache. And this is actually the solution that most processors nowadays take. So in this way, we can address the instruction cache and the data cache separately. And this makes the resource actually not something that there's a structural hazard, because now we have two resources instead of one. Normally what they would do is that the level 2 cache then is still unified. Embedded caches. So caches reduce the average case performance. This is not sufficient in real-time environments, which are normally very important in embedded systems. Instruction caches are widely used in embedded processors, but data caches are a real issue. Then, let me see, it doesn't say why it would be an issue. I can think of a good reason for why it would be a problem. If you have a real-time environment, you need to have strict boundaries on the time it takes to get your data to your processor. Because, for example, if you encode video, you need to encode or decode the frame in time. If you don't, you will get a glitch in your video, which is not what you want. This means that I need to be sure that the data that I'm fetching, I am actually getting it in time. So data caches can be a real issue, because they need to be. I need to be sure what's going to be there. So one solution, and actually somebody during the break already asked me about it. One solution could be we have a scratchpad memory. So a scratchpad memory, basically, it's not a cache which is automatic. It's something that we can actually address. We are responsible for what's going to be in the scratchpad memory. Either the compiler will do that or the programmer will do that, but at least we can directly address this memory. Normally this is either a separate memory space that we can address, or it's somehow part of the virtual memory address space, which is then mapped to this particular scratchpad memory. Another solution would be that we can lock portions of the cache. So if we say that certain values are very important, we make sure that they cannot be replaced, so we are sure that they're there. A cache access consumes less power than a memory access, and so we can further improve power efficiency. Apart from the real-time constraints that I just told you, these techniques can also be very good in power efficiency, which is also very important in embedded systems, because indeed the power to access the cache is going to be less than accessing the memory. And as we already said, that the MIPS 4300 also employs wave prediction to reduce the power. A scratchpad consumes also less than power than the cache. And is there anybody who can tell me why the scratchpad would consume less power than the cache?
Maybe because it has less logic.
It has less logic. It's just a piece of memory. While the cache is also a piece of memory, just if you have a 64K scratchpad and a 64K cache, then the cache first has also the tags and the valid bits, etc. It has comparators, it has multiplexers, all added to make the cache work. So yes, it's less complex. So this is a summary for cache optimization. Let me guess what the short versions are. You have the miss rate, the miss penalty, and the hit time. And you can see here all the different techniques that we talked about, and where they are beneficial and where they are potentially not beneficial. That's just in a few cases. And you can also see like a qualitative indication of how complex these solutions are. So I'm not going to go through them at this particular time, but take a look at it, and if you want to employ anything at any time, you can look at this particular slide. You can see also that some of them are not